Shalom Aleichem. I'm Rabbi Daniel Brenner, and we are thrilled that you're here to join Moving Traditions for our Rethinking the College Game Plan webinar. Tonight, we have two really exceptional guests who are going to give us a perspective on this topic. One, a college counselor, and not only a college counselor, we have the wonderful Deborah Heller, who is a college counselor for the Beacon School, which is a New York City public school, and also is the founder of Impact College Counseling. And Deborah also teaches college counselors at Hunter College and has trained dozens of college counselors who work with 11th and 12th graders who are getting ready to apply to college, or the 12th graders who are waiting to hear where they got into college if they didn't already have the early decision letter come last week. So she is working with many, many, many families, has experience with families of all sorts. So we're thrilled to have Deborah with us. We're also really absolutely pleased to have one of the vice presidents of Hillel, Dr. Maiya Edelson, who has worked in the campus environment and now is working on a national level, supporting hundreds of Hillel professionals who are working with thousands of Jewish college students and others. So it is really great that we're going to start with these two experts, and then we're going to hear from two really amazing students who are on two campuses that have been in the headlines, George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and Harvard University in Cambridge, Mass. So we are going to hear from student perspectives, and then we're going to finish the evening with your questions. So if you have any questions you'd like to put in the Q&A, feel free to put questions in the Q&A. We will come back together, we will talk, we'll discuss, and we really want to hear from you. We had over 400 parents register for this event, and many, many parents wrote us about their concerns. Those concerns were not only limited to what we've heard about in terms of hate speech directed towards either hate speech that was anti-Israel or anti-Jewish. Those concerns were beyond just those topics. I could say just those topics, but those topics in and of themselves are serious. There are other concerns about the safety of young Jewish folks. And when we think about young Jewish folks, we really want to embrace the diversity of the Jewish people and think that there are Jewish families and Jewish students who really are in just about every possible category you can imagine. And they are asking questions about the campuses that they're planning on hopefully attending. And we want to respond to these questions. So I want to start us off with really bringing Deborah on and starting with some of the most basic questions that parents of 12-year-olds have. And those questions really, I think about just my own experience. Oh my God, for the last 18 years, I've put so much energy and time and effort and care into raising this child, and now I'm letting them go. And now they're leaving the nest and
Mm-hmm.
all of the emotions that come up with it. I also
Yeah.
am just thinking about parents being in that horrible place of, oh my God, other people who don't know my child are judging my child and determining, will my child get that letter of acceptance?
Yep.
And parents are in that place often, come the springtime, which of the options is going to be the right option for
Right.
my child? So I want to just start off by asking you, in all the years that you've worked with parents, um, what do you feel is at the heart of this journey?
Yeah.
What's at the heart?
I think love, is at the heart of everything, right? But it amplifies and comes out in some fear and anxiety. And so I think that, this process is really emotional for parents and for students. Sometimes more parents, sometimes more students, depends on the family. But I do think that, this is kind of a time when parents start like reflecting over, okay, have I been a good parent? Have I prepared my child, for kind of going out into the world for the first time and really making some decisions for the first time on their own. So I think that this is a stressful time period from the moment they start thinking about college all the way to the moment they say goodbye on the college campus and beyond. It's really a time of self-reflection, and it's a time of stress for a lot of families, because they're not really sure how to navigate it without ruining, the relationship between the parent and the child, because very often that stress they end up taking it out on each other. And then also just, feeling comfortable letting go, right? So, there's a lot psychologically, emotionally, spiritually going on during and throughout this process.
I know that in your practice, you say to parents that the 12th grader has got to make the decision. Do you want to
Yep.
say a little bit about why you emphasize
Yep.
that the 12th grader is making the decision, not the family, not,
Yep.
but that student is making the decision? Why do you
Yeah.
say?
I mean, first and foremost, they have to be there for 4 years, right? It is going to be their college experience. So, they need to feel good about this decision. And so often I have parents, I'll have a family meeting and the parents just take over, and the student really doesn't feel comfortable saying what they want to say, right? So maybe I met with the student, I always meet with juniors, and then I bring the parents in. And so by the time I meet with the parent, I already know what the junior wants, but very often they stay silent or they just agree with their parent because they don't want to, start something. And, it's really important. I feel like it's my job to help advocate for that student and their voice and make sure that what they want gets heard. But, the most positive family situations that I see in this process is where the parents kind of sit back and they let the students lead. They're not doing nothing. They're definitely a part of the process, but they're letting the student lead and guide it, and they are really just supporting them in what they want, which I think really gives the student ownership and also really helps guide them in the sense that they're going to go someplace that they feel good about, right? It's all about finding the right fit. And, kind of back to what you were saying about parents feeling like their kids, people were going to judge where they're attending college, what type of program they're in. I am all about finding the right fit for your kid. There's two ways to approach the college process. One is, these are the colleges I want my kid to go to. Let's make my kid fit those colleges. And the other is, this is who the kid is. Let's find the right fit college for who they are, right? Which I just think ends up working way better for so many reasons, right? So there's not one right fit college out there. There's probably 200 right fit colleges out there for each student. And a lot of it is the attitude that they bring with them and what they're going to do once they get on campus, right? Do they want to be a small fish in a big pond? Do they want to be a big fish in a small pond? What kind of experience are they looking for? Do they want to be able to hide in a lecture hall? That kind of thing. So these are all the conversations that we have with students, but we want to make sure that parents are supporting, but also allowing them to really start thinking about these things themselves. Because if you just say to your kid, okay, here's the 12 colleges to look at, they're just going to look at that and they're not really going to introspectively think about what they really want out of a school.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking just specifically about your comment. You have to think if you want to be a big fish in a small pond,
Yeah.
if you want to
Yeah.
disappear in that lecture hall. I'm thinking about the current situation where so many Jewish parents are
Yep.
hearing, particularly about smaller liberal arts colleges, like
Yep.
fears that they're going to be, how should I put it, like a big target in a small
Yep.
pond, maybe.
Yep.
And like
Yep.
a
Like they
way
can
in which,
hide in the bigger.
so are you
Yeah,
hearing from parents who are now coming with different concerns about
definitely.
schools, and what are those concerns, and what are you sensing?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest concern is, will my student be safe on this campus? And I think the media is, really something that, it's in our face every day. So it's it's hard not to just take what we're getting in. You know, and even just, you know, in the past few days, you know, they've announced like these schools having less applications than usual. Don't worry, they still have enough applications. But just, you know,
Okay.
having less than usual. And that's 100% because of the media, right? But, you know, just because an incident happened and it's in the media doesn't mean that that is pervasive on the campus. Whereas the opposite is true. Maybe it is pervasive on a different campus and we're not even hearing about it, right? So I think it's really important to do your research.
And how do you do your research? Like
Yeah,
when a parent says like, well, I went to the tour and it seemed nice or whatever, like
right.
what do you say to them is the research part of it?
Yeah, I mean, going to the tour is great and all, and I'm not saying don't go on the tour, but that's the surface, right? You know, somebody's being trained in exactly what to say, and it's a specific person that was chosen to do that. Um, you want to talk to Jewish students on campus. And there's different ways of going about doing that. Ask in your community, anyone who goes to the school who they can connect with. Ask your college counselor or guidance counselor if they can connect you with alumni from your school who go to that college. Um, have a conversation with Hillel on campus, with Chabad on campus, you know, really get to know the campus. Obviously, visit, you know, that's 100%, but spend more time than just doing a tour. See if you can go to some events, specifically some Jewish events, see and talk to Jewish people, see how they feel, right? Because that is much more indicative of what your child's college experience is going to be like than what you're seeing in the media.
First of all, I love your perspective on this and it's very important. I also have heard that, there are some places which maybe just don't have the supportive environment for Jewish students. Like, how do
Mhm.
you help a parent think what are the other factors,
Yep.
whether like what are some of the things that
Do you mean like how do they figure out which campuses aren't supportive for Jewish students or just supportive in general?
well, oh, that's a great question. All right, let's go with
Yeah.
both of them.
Okay, great.
Actually, good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. So in terms of supportive for like make sure there is a Hillel, right? Make sure there is a Jewish organization on campus. If there is not, there is probably not a lot of Jews there, right? So that's number one, right? And that's always way before you know, the last 20 years people have been coming in and saying, you know, I want my kid to go somewhere where there's a good amount of Jews, where they're going to feel like, you know, there are others like them, right? And yes, obviously a smaller liberal arts school is going to probably have less than a large university of everything, right?
Sure.
um, but you know, there are definitely some small liberal arts colleges that specifically have a lot of Jews. It just really depends on the school. So it you know, on the surface maybe it's a small liberal arts college, but you got to dig deeper than that, right? But I will say, you know, there's other types of supports, obviously, besides just supports for Jews. If they have a really good support system in general, they will probably be more supportive for Jewish young adults, because they're going to be supportive for everyone, right? And that is one of the benefits of a smaller university, because you will probably have an advisor you meet with all the time. You know, very often they have, let's say, a professor that lives in the dorms, and they have events, and you know, it just feels more like homey. So there's that kind of experience. Also, you know, over the years, as colleges have realized, oh, we need more support for, you know, our Black students, our Latino students, whatever the case may be, they've come up with programs specifically to support these students. And, you know, considering what's going on right now, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some support programs specifically for Jewish students that are going to be coming up at these colleges, which I think is really important.
What do you think has been successful of those like specific support programs? And I
Yeah,
know it's not only Black students or only Latino
sure.
students, and there've been other examples. What has been successful about that model that we might learn from?
So I think what tends to be successful is students are self-selective, right? So they're not being pushed into something; they get to choose to do it. But I also think there's a lot of programs that start before college even starts, and I think that's really helpful. Oftentimes they have like a couple weeks, up to 6 weeks before you know, school starts. They get on campus. They maybe even take a sample class. They get to know people. They get to know the area. They meet with their advisor, they choose their classes. And I think that that really helps them feel more comfortable in a place where maybe there's not enough people that look like them, you know? So I think,
So
yeah,
I'm just brainstorming here. Maybe
yeah,
something for Jewish students this summer could help in that
yeah.
in that way. That
Absolutely.
that's
Absolutely. And
fascinating.
he's like, Maiya, there are, there are also, different schools that do this for all students. Some schools have, like a freshman, every single kid has to sign up for some type of orientation weekend or week program where they, get to know a group, or if it's a really small school, maybe the entire freshman class comes and does it. But they have bonding experiences and really get to know each other. And I think that really, really helps versus getting on campus and feeling like I don't know anyone here. This is a completely foreign experience.
Yeah, very important. I mean, even just on a basic level, I'm thinking it may help now for parents of Jewish students to think, do I know another Jewish student going to the school? So when
Absolutely.
my child arrives at the school,
Yep.
they will have someone to connect to, because
Yep.
just knowing that this is more fraught than in the past.
Absolutely. I mean, there are also definitely like mentor systems in place, but maybe, yeah, maybe like Hillel on campus. Sorry to call you out. Like Hillel on campus says, okay, we're gonna get some upperclassmen, and that we're gonna pair them each to a freshman coming in, and they're gonna, be the person who meets with them the first week and make sure that they're, they know where everything is, whatever the case may be.
I,
I think
I I know that they do a fantastic job of that on many campuses. So yes, absolutely. I'm thinking about some other considerations. Not only some of the things we've read in the headlines about the way that October 7th has impacted campus environment, but I've also read about bills that are being considered in Virginia and South Carolina that would limit trans healthcare and push it to so you can't get healthcare until you're 21.
yep,
I've read about abortion restrictions in Texas and
yep.
in Louisiana that are making it very complicated for anyone who may need an abortion while they're in college. Are there other concerns that you're hearing from parents now, as we're also monitoring like some of these shifts in state law and how they're going to impact young people?
Yeah, I mean, I think over the past few years, I've had so many families come in and say, okay, no red states or
Okay,
no South,
okay,
like just literally,
right.
and I understand that, you want your kid to be somewhere where they're going to be safe. And that is in a multitude of different ways, right? Physically, mentally, emotionally safe. And so, not wanting to go to a school in a state where they can't get something that that they could need, I get that. I get that that could be a part of the process. And now, of course, we're adding, anti-Semitism to it. And, unfortunately, anti-Semitism on college campuses is not something new, right? I mean, I went to college 20 years ago. Someone from Alabama, my first week asked me if I had horns, so this is not something totally new. And that was the first time I faced anti-Semitism on college campus, so I do think there's something to be said for you're gonna go to college and you're gonna have different experiences, right? That not all of them are going to be great, but you are going to have difficult conversations, and you want to make sure you know this is your time to grow as a person, and this is your time to get to know people of all different cultures and backgrounds and ideas. And some of that's going to be great, some of that's not going to be great. But I understand the idea of wanting to say, okay, well, let's just choose colleges that we at least can eliminate some of these factors, right? We can't eliminate everything, but let's at least eliminate things that we know are going to not be great for our kids.
Great. All right, Deborah, that was fantastic introduction. We're going to come back to you,
Okay, I'll
and
be here.
really, really appreciate being grounded in some of just the basic social, emotional, and spiritual realities of what the
Yeah.
journey is and how you decide and who you talk to along the way to make that decision. So that's also a great way for us to segue into introducing Dr. Maiya Edelson from Hillel. And Maiya, I really just want to start first with just your reaction to hearing what Deborah said and hearing like your perspective on like what do you look at when you think about what should parents be looking for when they're looking at Jewish life on campus?
First of all, thank you for having me on tonight. I don't know, when Deborah was speaking, I was doing a lot of nodding, a lot of agreeing.
Yes.
And what really struck me from her comments was firstly the idea of centering the student who's going to be attending the school. And I can't tell you, I worked on campus for 14 years, met so many families who were coming through on visits, great questions. And always, it's how is that student reacting to what they're seeing around them and in the whole process, which can be extremely overwhelming, making sure that the student has a voice to ask questions. I think it's great if students can connect with a current student peer to peer to really have that space, maybe to attend an event together to sit down and talk. Because that just makes it makes it more authentic and you want that decision to feel really good. Um, and so I just, I think that that's a huge part of it. And I also think just there's that idea that, especially we read so much about various campuses and the headlines. We're going to hear from a couple students at two amazing schools later today, but it's a very personal decision, where someone's going to go to school. And so taking the time to do your homework, to visit if you can, to speak to people, to also understand that a headline might not, probably doesn't capture the full experience of what a student has there. And I think also, recognizing there might be a school that has the major you want or you have a scholarship to, and there might be other challenges, and really thinking about what's the full picture here and how am I going to be able to navigate it. I think that that's super important. And there are a lot of great ideas for Hillel, some we're doing, some we maybe should be doing, but I can comment more on that. But just, that'll be something I come back to as we talk tonight, is that Hillel is here to help you with this process, to get you information, to help when you visit, to help make those decisions. And then obviously when a student is on campus, there to be right there with them through the whole experience. So, yeah.
So Maiya, I can only imagine what it's like to be working just the last couple of months, what it's been like to be working at Hillel. I mean, when I was reading the news, particularly about what happened at Cornell, where the Hillel building was really threatened by someone and the FBI had to get involved. And like when I hear about somebody really being in a position where they feel like they are a target in a way that they had not felt. I've been to the Cornell Hillel. I felt very safe there when I visited, but I was just imagining, wow, all of a sudden people are feeling threatened. And I just want to hear a little bit about how you and your colleagues have um, reacted and come together, and what are the challenges that that are, let's say, if there are novel challenges, what are the things that are occupying your time and energy?
Um, Thanks for the question. There's a lot of different ways to approach it. There's no sugarcoating or denying this has been an incredibly challenging 2 months on campus. You referenced the incident at Cornell. There have been, we know through our own reporting directly from students and from campus professionals that there have been just a significant increase in anti-Semitic incidents on campus, and that these concerns that I'm sure many of the folks on this call have, they're real. That we the ADL and Hillel partnered on a study at the end of November that suggested that close to 3/4 of Jewish students on campus since October 7th have experienced or witnessed anti-Semitism since the start of the school year. And just to compare that, in 2021, so it's 2 years ago, it was not even a third of students. So there's clearly been a significant increase. And I think that, that is very real. There are very real challenges. And I think an important part of the story is our students are on campus still. And what do we do about this? And what is being done proactively, both by students, by Hillel staff, and working with campus administration to make sure that every Jewish student can have a positive, vibrant Jewish experience on their campus, academic experience, social experience, everything. So, from Hillel's perspective, we've really been providing a lot of support to our staff who are working directly on campus, educational resources, helping them meet the moment, curricula, and working with their students. We've worked from security efforts to increasing mental health resources. We've really tried to give our folks who are on campus every resource possible to make sure that every Jewish student can thrive and can work through this. And I'm very proud of how our student leaders and how our staff have responded. But it's certainly been, we'd be having this webinar if October 7th had not happened, because this is a topic every year, right? Jewish families are going to be thinking, where should my
Sure.
son go to school? But some of these some of the nature of the incidents and the challenges have felt very different. So
Oh, absolutely. When you think about specific campuses that have really stepped it up and really like responded in a positive and supportive way, what comes to mind? What are some of the stories that people should be hearing more about?
awesome. Great question. So first of all, I want to say that, you know, we can talk about one of the best responses to anti-Semitism is building strong Jewish communities. And Hillel has not wavered from that across the country, across the globe, right? We have our Jewish learning fellowships and their Shabbat dinners and their social activities. There's a deep commitment to social justice work, and all that has continued. And I think, we just finished Hanukkah, obviously, and during the week of Hanukkah, many schools finishing up their term, and just the pictures literally of light of Hanukkot across campus, people gathering for Hanukkah celebrations, for Shabbat during Hanukkah. Something we've heard from a lot of campuses is also they've met Jewish students this semester they hadn't met previously, that people are showing up with pride in ways that maybe they hadn't before. I heard a story from one of my colleagues in one of our smaller Hillel campuses in Florida of a last semester senior who came to an event and said, I wanted at some point in college to do something Jewish, and I'm so sad that this is my last semester and this is the first time I'm walking into a Jewish space to connect. You mentioned Cornell before. There's a great article. Cornell actually had an amazing interfaith community dinner just a couple of weeks ago with Muslim and Jewish students coming together. It was led by the Hillel Rabbi and the Muslim chaplain. Elon, Syracuse, a number of schools have really done some exemplary interfaith and intercultural programs this semester. So there's a lot of specific examples. I'd be remiss to leave some of them out, but those moments are there, even in such a dark time. It's actually inspired a lot of folks to really come together and experience Jewish joy when
Yeah,
we're
I did hear about something wonderful with Dr. Susanna Heschel at Dartmouth, and
yes.
so other people started to talk about that, and I'm glad to hear about more examples of really wonderful ways of thinking about the campus community. So I've also seen research from Brandeis about anti-Semitism, and I am not in the business of like the here are the worst campuses of anti-Semitism. And like, I mean,
Mhm.
that research does go into that place. It does share where some of the problems are. But what I noticed from that is that there is a list of schools that is available. If you want to read the Brandeis research, you can see, and many of the schools are schools that everybody's heard about from the headlines, that there are problems with anti-Semitism on those campuses. And then there's a list of schools that relatively low level of anti-Semitism. So like, what are your thoughts on the way that that's playing out, and what does it impact your thinking? Do you think we may need to have different things in schools where there's this kind of a lower level anti-Semitism than in schools where there's really a hostile environment?
It's a very valid question. I'll tell you, when I worked on campus, I was on 3 large state schools, one in Northern California, UC Davis, one on the East Coast, University of Maryland, and then University of Texas at Austin. So 3 very different parts of the country, 3 different cultural climates. It's fascinating to see kind of how it plays out. So the regional differences resonate with me because I lived through them. I
Yes.
think those lists are there. I think folks who are looking at schools can look and kind of see where that study, where schools you and your family might be interested in are. I also think, like, I don't know if we want to wholesale write off like a whole list of schools saying, well, those aren't great for Jewish students, because Jewish students should be safe and be able to thrive everywhere. And that's really the goal. And I think, what are campuses doing proactively to build relationships with administration, to build Jewish life? And like that also has to be looked at. I think also for some of the campuses where, there's a perception of greater hostility are also campuses with really strong, big Jewish communities. And there are some campuses with like lower hostility that I'm sure there's one-off incidents that have happened. So that is to say, it's no guarantee wherever you are, you're going to have a certain experience. Again, it's all about understanding the environment, understanding how you're going to navigate it. So, but I think that is important right now, is to think, there's no one group of schools that maybe we should write off. It's all about how do we make sure that Jewish students can have a positive experience everywhere, and also make it like Deborah said, like there's a list of factors that go into where you decide to send your student, and there's not one. And so looking at that all together, and that might be part of what informs a decision.
That I like to hear this because I have a child at one of those schools. It's like the most anti-Semitic school, So I think, that child also is enjoying wonderful Jewish community and conversation, and even is getting invited by professors to Shabbos dinner. So like it's like the reality can differ, person to person. I'm interested in just a specific question about the liberal Jewish community. I feel like, just as an outsider, I have many friends who have worked within the Hillel movement, and I've seen Hillel put a lot of energy into LGBTQ inclusion and celebration, and like that has been a huge part of Hillel in the last decade, I would say. Um, and now there seems to be some tension in the liberal Jewish community. That was one of the things that the Brandeis study found, was that liberal Jewish students are finding that they're they're in a place where there is tension between them and other liberal students.
Mhm.
Um, could you say a little bit about this specifically? Like where do you think like Hillel is like responding or supporting liberal Jewish students in a good way? Like what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah. So with our centennial, 100 years, our motto now at Hillel is all kinds of Jewish. I
I
think
like
that's
that
something,
motto.
yeah, it's
Great,
good. But
great.
it's something we take seriously, is we strive to create radically inclusive communities for our students wherever they are. And, Hillel as a movement, of course, every campus has its own specific programs and, what they're kind of focused on, what student groups they might have. But as a movement overall, we're incredibly committed to work of inclusivity, to bridge building work in terms of programming and creating welcome spaces for LGBT students. That's something we've been doing for a long time as a movement, in an area where in a lot of campuses, Hillel is seen as a leader. Um, Especially, amongst a lot of the religious and cultural organizations. So it's something we're really committed to. I think also, even like we just finished our Hillel Professional Conference a week and a half ago, and there's such a buzz about what does this mean now? What does it mean to be really doing outreach work, and to be both on a professional level and on the student level, to be um, creating connections with communities on campus so that our students can feel that they can be their whole selves. They can be Jewish and they can hold other parts of their identity at the same time. And that is something that's welcome at Hillel, and how do we make sure other campus spaces that's welcome also. So that's something we're really committed to as a movement.
Beautiful. All right, Maya, we'll come back to you. I think I want to now turn to our students, because like they have on the ground perspectives that no one else really has, actually. I really am looking forward to hearing from them. And we're going to start with Laine Schlezinger. And let me just say a little background on Laine. Laine was a Cole Colinu Fellow during high school, and now is giving back as a Tzelem group leader, which is a Moving Traditions group for LGBTQ plus teens. Laine is supporting teenagers. That's just beautiful. Thank you for what you do. And just, it's great that you are um, making a space for Jewish teenagers to be together and support each other and listen to one another. So that's amazing. Thank you for contributing to Moving Traditions in that way. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience as a Jewish student at George Washington University. Um, I know that GW was in the headlines when students from the Students for Justice of Palestine projected "Glory to the Martyrs" on the side of the library building, was it? Was it the library?
Yes, it's the
Okay.
library.
So, Laine, take us back to October 7th and that the reaction like on campus and your sense of all of it.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much for having me. I think my October 7th doesn't start on campus. I actually also work as an eighth and ninth grade religious school teacher at a Reformed congregation in Maryland. And so when I learned what had happened in Israel, I had just woken up on the floor of that synagogue leading a retreat for our eighth and ninth graders. When it was like, I was like, oh, what's the plan for today? And my co-teacher's like, we're pivoting everything to talk about the war. And I had like gotten 6 hours of sleep, and I'm like, what war? And so that is where it all happened. And so I wasn't on campus for the first 12 hours. I was surrounded by a group of teens, and I was trying to process what happened. I was trying to help them process what happened. And then I went home back to my dorm, and I didn't really talk about it with anyone. And I don't have a lot of Jewish friends on campus. So when I saw the projections, because I live right across from the library, I was definitely startled. I didn't feel unsafe. I definitely felt challenged. And
Mm,
that's how I would describe a lot of the interactions that I've had with folks is I don't feel particularly unsafe as a Jewish student, but I am hearing things that because I am Jewish, I've not heard before. And so, I mean, there's one example of conversations with a friend where at some point we're talking about it. You know, I'd mentioned that this was an isolating experience, scary, frustrating, anxiety inducing, all of these things. And at one point, um, one of my friends, and actually someone I live with, said something along the lines of, but isn't resistance justified? And that was really challenging because as a like activist and someone who has worked in queer and trans advocacy spaces, I want to say yes, of course, but I know like this was attack against like civilians and like Jewish people. And so that was a moment where I had to step back and be like, hey, I can see where you're coming from. I can see how you're approaching this. But the reality is that is not what happened. And just sort of like having to push back on that. And now it's like, you know, I'm going about my day and I'm like, I live across the living room from someone who's at one point believed that. And that just kind of contributes to the sense of like, you are holding things that like not the average student is not. I've stopped telling people that I work at a synagogue and started telling them I work at an after school program. It's just a very
mm,
surreal experience where it's like I'm not facing any direct threat, but it just feels so kind of like weird and scary. Where I'm like, I feel like maybe I'm the one who's hyper vigilant. Maybe it would be fine if it was like, oh yeah, I work with eighth and ninth graders at a synagogue. But like the environment is so like clouded with the news and this is just anywhere. So it's like not specific to GW, but when I'm talking to young, like to my peers, it's just like I don't feel like going into all of it right now. I kind of just want to break from it all. And at the same time, I'm trying to like listen and learn and realize that these are things that I am not necessarily exposed to. And I'm trying to like keep an open mind and find some sort of common ground and realize that like I'd not learn like all of this in my like Jewish education work. So there is some like knowledge gaps that I am genuinely trying to fill, but it is still in a context in an environment that feels just a little bit unsettling.
mm. When you caught yourself like going, "Oh, I'm saying that I'm working in a school instead of working in a synagogue," like
Mhm.
how did you feel in that moment and like what was going on?
It's honestly such a bummer just because I know that if I like could give context or like if I felt pushed to give context, I would say stuff like, oh, and here's how we're educating our young people and specifically the curriculum for eighth and ninth graders at the synagogue has to do a lot with social justice. So I've been spending the last 4 or 5 weeks working with a group of students on issues surrounding the war. We've had conversations with an expert from the Institute of Peace just last week, where we are trying to bring in sort of this unifying like goal towards peace and understanding one another and pushing their perspectives in terms of what have they learned thus far. And religious school, how is this challenging things? I think if I could give all that context, like I have like 10 minutes when the rabbi drives me back to the metro station.
You want to
and
have like a essay that you pass out
yeah, it's like, here's what we do, and here's the conversations I have with staff and faculty, and here's all the ways that I think you'd be surprised that a Jewish institution is thinking about this crisis and the ways that we are trying to make sure that students have all the information and also are, drawing on those social justice Jewish values in ways that maybe someone would be surprised to find in a synagogue, but obviously I can't do that. I've already written so many essays this final season. I don't have time for one more that I give to everyone to be like, oh, a synagogue, what's happening with Israel? And
right.
No, please, I promise you there's not only should I not have to defend myself, but also I think folks would be surprised the thoughtful ways that progressive Jewish spaces are trying to introduce young people to this issue, while also realizing that we can't shelter them forever, and having real and nuanced conversations about Israelis and Palestinians is part of how we create smart and nuanced and prideful Jewish adults in whatever way that comes up for them.
I love that quote. Okay, yes, I affirm everything you're saying. That is so important. Laine, you've said that you don't have many Jewish friends. I know there's a lot of Jewish people on that campus. Do you want to reflect a little on the Jewish community and your position vis-a-vis the Jewish community on campus? Could you help us understand like how that somebody who is so active and so committed and so articulate about Jewish education as you are, is in a situation where you, for one reason or another, are not socializing with many Jewish folks.
Yeah, so I think one aspect of it is we have a very large Jewish population. So freshman year, showing up to Hillel dinners was just too overwhelming for me. It was a lot of people for various different reasons, including hearing and just being shy. I don't function the best in really big spaces. So I find that my connection to the Jewish community on campus is specifically through Kahila, which is our queer Jewish organization. It's very, very small. I think I've been pulling up and end up doing a lot of e-board function roles, do a little bit of finance stuff for them here and there just to keep what I think is a really important organization going. But that really is my main touch point. I think a couple people show up to meetings. They're once a month. It's usually tea time. We just hang out and chat and just be queer Jews, and it's really lovely. But I think the intersection of queer and trans identity and Jewish spaces can be challenging. I know that I didn't feel super comfortable at first in Hillel spaces, and I think it's hard to integrate yourself into Jewish spaces as you're further along in your college career, where you are no longer the freshman, or it's oh, you're a junior, so you have your social circles, and for me that's just kind of how it shaped out. But I think in terms of outside of Jewish communities, I have a wonderful group of friends I met doing URJ Heller High, and we've been just in our little group chat having sort of nuanced and difficult conversations about oh, this is a really challenging time to be Jewish, but also be queer and Jewish, and sort of helping us shape our own thoughts around the conflict as young adults, as people who care about human rights. And I think that's been a really valuable space. Also, I mentioned working at that nearby synagogue. I think every Sunday I'm driven the 10 minutes from synagogue to the metro station because my coworkers refuse to let me take the bus home after dark. And having an opportunity to talk to a rabbi who has spent time in Israel and the occupied territories, who is comfortable saying things like, oh yeah, for Hanukkah, we have staff gifts of soap made by ethnic minorities in Israel, or olive oil by poor Palestinian farmers, and who was not afraid of embracing the topic from an egalitarian lens, has been really refreshing and helps me feel grounded. So when I get back to campus and I know that everything's crazy and people are coming at this from all angles, that like there are people who genuinely have the same perspectives as me and are able to incorporate queerness and transness and equal rights and common humanity and Jewish identity and all of the factors that make this conflict so challenging, especially to people with identities. It's just like very reassuring to know that there are people out there who care about me and who I care about, who are able to sustain me and push me to think more, but also understand where I come from. So I don't have to give them that essay of like, I promise, like, you don't
Right.
have to judge me in this way. And it's like frustrating that I would have to do that in the first place.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it seems like you have found a network of people who really can support each other in like thinking about all the complexities and all the nuances and all the things you're trying to hold. And that's really important. And who knows, maybe if you at age 18 would have liked to be in this, spaces with lots of people, you may have found other people. You never know what would have happened. Um, but it is clear to me that what's really important is that you're not alone in trying to process everything that's going on. You have people that you can really talk to about and that really understand, like, how can I hold like being a liberal person and also caring for and being connected to Israel, Israelis, Jewish life, Jewish history, all of the things. So Laine, thank you. We're going to come back to you in a moment. I want to introduce our other college student, Caleb Levine, who is at Harvard. And uh, Cal, nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you too.
So I'm going to start with the very same way that we started with Laine. Like, can you take us back to just being on campus, October 7th, the reaction? I mean, I remember like Harvard was like front page news because 30 student organizations like wrote, "We blame everything on Israel," and it was like a big deal. Like, what was it like being on campus, and what was the talk at that moment?
Um, yeah, so actually, like Lane, I was not on campus. I happened to be sort of away for the weekend. It was Columbus Day weekend. But
Okay.
I came back. Well, first, I sort of woke up, read the news, saw this letter that placed all blame for all of the unfolding violence on the state of Israel. That was published by our campus's sort of leading Palestinian advocacy group and co-signed by about 30 other student organizations from both the college and the grad schools. And I was immediately just sort of appalled, both at the sort of callousness of the language in the letter and the timing of it. It was published on October 7th as Hamas fighters sort of were still in Israel committing the atrocity that they did. So the fact that it was published so soon was also super appalling and honestly a bit like enraging to me. Um, and I think the story sort of likely ended there for most people who read about this. But actually, in the sort of days and weeks that followed, the temperature sort of cooled down both on campus and in my own mind. And I think I was able to see things a bit more clearly and came to realize that, as is so often the case, like the world is not as engulfed in flames as it appears to be from the New York Times headlines. Um,
Yes.
because in reality, like I agree that letter was appalling, and the Palestinian group that published it and sort of spearheaded it rolled it back a little bit. Also, in the days and weeks that followed, a number of the student organizations that signed on rescinded their signatures, not having realized what exactly they were getting into. And I think it's also worth noting that because the letter was published just hours after the attack began, none of these 30 student organizations had time to consult their members or anything. So what you had was a singular leader unilaterally signing on behalf of their organization, making it sound like a greater number supported this statement. And so in like a week or two after the fact, after the sort of after the sort of media freakout had moved on, what you had was, by my estimates, about less than 100 undergraduates, maybe even less than 50, or sorry, not undergraduates, students at Harvard, and that's out of 25,000 plus students. So what you had was a pretty small contingent of students who caused a big fuss, and sort of the American sort of news media machine took the bait and made it seem like that um, perspective predominates campus life, and I just really don't think that it does, both just from a numbers perspective and also just from my lived experience. I don't really find that that perspective is sort of like all around me when I'm on campus.
Okay, so let's go to your lived experience and the perspective that you are hearing from your friends and your peers. Like, what do you think is playing out? And would you say that there's a nuanced, complex understanding of the situation or something else? Like what is the general climate?
Um, yeah, so I think another I'll just take this opportunity again to say that um, being sort of in the American Jewish community and reading the American Jewish news, it can feel like this issue is everywhere on campus, but the vast majority of students are just utterly apathetic or ignorant about it. Like, this is for just the vast majority of students. They either don't know enough, don't care enough, or are just doing other things. So I think um, I just think it's important to know that if you're sort of a student arriving on campus, you don't if you don't make this issue like your issue, you can sort of, in my experience at Harvard, move around day to day without it sort of smacking you in the face. Um, but sort of, to answer your question more directly, I think after the immediate, well, I sort of initially there were sort of vigils and um, organized by sort of Hillel and Jewish groups and Palestinian groups, um, and that has continued. And I think the sort of like tenor has calmed down, but I think there are still sort of two camps. The sort of right leaning sort of Jewish students who tend to sort of unequivocally defend Israel, with whom I don't necessarily align. And then there's also a sort of left-wing Palestinian advocacy contingent that's pretty expressly anti-Zionist, with whom I also don't align. And so I sort of find myself in the middle a little bit, sometimes without sort of finding like an ideological or sort of like an institutional ideological home as a Jew. But that doesn't stop me from finding community with Jews on campus. There are sort of more grassroots like dinner, like Shabbat dinner groups that I've found and have had a lot of fun with. And I still go to Hillel and enjoy their programming too. So I think that's about sort of the state of things.
So we had some people write in a question. Have professors said anything about this? When we bring Laine back, I'll also ask Laine, but like, Cal, has this been a topic of conversation in a class that is not about this specific thing? Is this part of the academic discourse? Like I've heard from other universities that professors are just going off topic and going on to this, but is that happening or is that not happening?
Somewhat surprisingly, no, at least in my experience. And I'm in a my major is called social studies, and it's sort of like it's like an interdisciplinary major that incorporates political science and history. And so I would think that I would run into this more often from faculty, but I think there are a couple factors at play. I don't know, people have sort of a tight ship to run in terms of their syllabus, and they have to get through what they have to get through. Um, but also, I find that I find that people are reluctant to express their views publicly on this issue in particular. Whether it's like, I think it's mostly for fear of like ostracization or like retribution, mostly social retribution. People don't actually think they're going to get punished, but it's I find that if you ask someone about this issue, they'll sort of check over their shoulders first in a way that they won't with any other issue. And I have a feeling that's sort of what the professors are doing as well. And yeah, I think it's sad that speech is sort of being socially like stifled here, but I don't think it's necessarily um, like targeted at Jews. I just think everyone is kind of scared to say what they really think. Yeah.
Do you think it's particularly challenging to be a liberal person who also has a connection to Israel and cares about Israel right now?
Yeah, it hasn't been easy. Well, yeah, like I said before, that I don't super feel that there's an institutional home for me, and like a sort of space where I feel like I can speak openly without being or having to sort of get defensive or combative. Um, but like I said earlier, I think if you seek it out, there are often like-minded Jews, and I have certainly found some. And so, yeah, I think I've probably had a slightly harder time finding community than um, a Jewish student who um, is, like I said, more sort of staunchly Zionist. Um, but that doesn't mean that I haven't been able to find it if I seek it out.
That's great. So I want to bring back everybody for the final part of this, and let's just start with Deborah and Maiya. Like, you've heard the perspectives of Laine and Cal. Um, I got a lot from it. I'm just interested what you are taking away from it, like what you want to emphasize and what you're hearing. Deborah, let's start with you, since we started with you.
Sure. I think, one thing that they both had in common was they had a different experience, right? And I think, anyone, if you talk to if you just, pulled a handful of Jews at each of those universities and any other university, you're going to hear that, right? Like some people are going to say one thing and some people are going to say another thing. But I think it shows you that, and this is not just for Jewish students and not just about this topic, but college experience, much of it is going to be what you make of it, is going to be who you choose to hang out with and who you spend your time with and those kind of things. And you have to go into it with a certain attitude to get the best out of your experience. So I think that both of them have a great head on their shoulders, and that they're really finding their people and trying to navigate this really difficult situation, and they're doing great.
Awesome. Maiya, what were your thoughts or perspectives on hearing them?
First of all, excuse me, it was great to hear from both of you. I really enjoyed learning about you and your experience on campus. Two amazing schools, amazing campuses. And it's just to underscore also, as I was listening and learning about you, the power of relationships, and that so much of college is about the people who are around, the immediate people around you, folks you meet through your own interpersonal relationships and friendships and classes, and just that kind of struck me from both your stories, and something to remember, I think, for folks as they're thinking about, and your students are thinking about what their experience is going to be like on campus.
So I want to flip the question for Laine and Cal now. So I'm sure that there are lots of parents of 12th graders on this webinar, but there may also be some 12th graders. Like, what advice would you give? Like, if you were going to talk with a 12th grader who's like Jewish in a lot of the ways that you are Jewish, what advice would you give to that student as they're making a choice between colleges or where to go? Like, what are some of the things you might say?
I think the first is like take a deep breath. You're going to be okay. Like the news cycle makes it seem really scary. And I think when and even like encountering definitely some of the um, I guess aggressive isn't the right word, but the more staunch pro-Palestine, anti-Zionist sentiment that like I was just not used to hearing, and it took me off guard. But then when you think and you step back and you think, what do these people want? What are they saying? Then I think you will find that it is not as scary as you think. And there's no expectation for you to, reach people that don't necessarily want to be reached, or to go into these spaces and defend yourself. But I know that I've done a lot of work on understanding that I think there is common ground, that we all, care about people, and we all like care about children, especially as an educator, realizing that like everyone here cares about what happens to young people in Israel and Palestine. And that's something that, me and a friend or a roommate or a fellow e-board member at the Trans Student Union might not necessarily agree on how it gets there, but I think we can find common ground, and that like we both care deeply about the lives of people, as I think is a very human thing to do. And when we see that people are threatened and are experiencing violence and displacement, then there's like a unifying call for like, hey, it sucks that this happens in our world. So I think leaning into that common humanity, but also realizing that one of the reasons you're going to college is to experience new things. And I think for people who were Jewish the way I was as a high school student, this is new. And I have just been reminding myself, this is what I came to college for, is to be exposed to new opinions and to think critically about them, sort of to answer that question about discussions of the conflict in classes. I am taking a multicultural psychology class, and it was literally like a couple days before our historical trauma unit. And so I'm learning about how the Holocaust, and I'm learning about how the Nakba affected people, and that's not something I've learned about before. And sort of looking at the realities from within my discipline and sort of incorporating all of this knowledge into how I see the world. And, lucky that I have a professor who was sensitive to how inflammatory there was both Israeli, Jewish, and Palestinian students in that class. And I think she did a great job of handling these are the facts. But there are so many truths and cultural attitudes and opinions and beliefs that go into this issue, where I find that it is challenging at first. You're going to be caught off guard. I think I've said that a lot, but pushing through that and realizing it's okay to be a little uncomfortable, but where are places where either you can let your guard down among people who feel similar to you, sort of understanding what is the scope of Hillel versus Chabad. I know every school has like a different leaning in terms of what's the place to be. Are there, if you're really passionate about this, are there organizations that have similar political views? If you're someone who wants to be in a GW for Israel versus a J Street versus a Jewish Voices for Peace, I don't necessarily want to be prescriptive in terms of how Jews should feel politically about this conflict. But regardless of how you as a teen are starting to understand this issue, are there places on campus where you are going to find similarities? Because it can be isolating to not have that institutional home, as you mentioned, Cal. So I think just overall, sort of taking a deep breath, reminding that like they're not out to get you specifically. And I think you can feel that way. And I think we can trick ourselves into feeling that way. And then there's instances where it is that, where there is a kernel of truth in that. But stepping back, maybe if you're at a bigger campus, you can kind of hide in that lecture hall, hide on your way to class, but making sure that you aren't taking it too personally, that you're finding spaces to engage in dialogue, both to just ignore the conflict entirely and to like be pushed by folks around you who you trust and who will respect you. And also just like take care of yourself. I don't know, I think I've put Instagram in a little folder that says no with a bunch of thumbs down emojis, and it doesn't really work, but it's just a reminder that like what you're hearing and what you're seeing online is like not the reality of what it is. You can take a couple days without feeling outraged, and once you're recharged, you can get back in the fray if that's something that you really care to do. You also don't have to. Like, no one's forcing you to be a representative for progressive Jews or for queer Jews or for Jews at your universities. Take it by day. Remember that like there are spaces for you, and that you can disengage if you need to, and that it's definitely challenging with people who fiercely argue for things that you find contradictory, you find challenging, or even dangerous and threatening. But I think it's been a way for me to give some sort of peace and say, at the end of the day, most people just care about other humans being safe and healthy. And I think that's something that we can all agree on.
Yeah, I love your attitude and perspective. I think the one thing that I would, if we had more time, I would say, when do you say, I can't just ignore this and I've got to like activate and I've got to speak up against it? I mean, but that's for a longer conversation. And I'm sure you probably have thought about some of that yourself, as you think, okay, this is not making me feel personally unsafe, but it's making me feel uncomfortable. What would be the limit? But that doesn't in any way take away from the wider point, which is just like, take care of yourself. It's such a great, no, don't go down the rat hole or whatever. The Instagram. Anyway, Laine, that was awesome. Cal, any advice for prospective parents or 12th graders out there, like thinking what are the questions they should be asking, or what do you think that they should keep to heart?
Yeah, I feel like my co-panelists covered a lot, and I'll just echo what they said. For the most part, if um, having a vibrant Jewish community is important for you, get some on-the-ground perspectives from students on those campuses. Um, that's important. And I think the word safety of Jewish students on campus is really thrown away or thrown around a lot. And I think I just want to underscore that you're gonna be safe. I have felt that my physical safety has never been under threat. I haven't heard about any Jewish students targeted physically for being Jewish on campus, at Harvard, that is. And so I'm just speaking to my experience. I'm not saying it's universal, but I just want to underscore that your physical safety, you're probably going to be okay. And then in terms of like a sort of more holistic sense of belonging, um, that can get trickier. Like I'm not gonna lie. Like you're probably gonna be confronted with some ideas that you disagree with or you even find abhorrent. But I think part of that, or like some of the most enriching conversations and experiences I have had here have been when I've been faced with those sort of head on. For example, I was getting dinner like 2 weeks ago with a close friend of mine, actually, and we were just sort of chatting about the current state of the war. And he is sort of to the left of me, and he was talking about the civilian death toll in Gaza um, and how and then sort of this line slipped out and he said, I just can't stand like the Zionists. And I was like, wow, let's slow down. And um, I then asked him, like, what do you think Zionists, what do you mean when you say Zionist? And he says, oh, like the people who just like brazenly support the brutal subjugation of Palestinians. And this guy is actually Jewish, by the way, which may surprise you or not. He's not observant, but he's Ashkenazi ethnically. And I say, well, first, I think you may be working with an unreliable definition of Zionism. It may surprise you that I'm Zionist. And his eyes widened a little bit. He was embarrassed. I laughed a little bit. And we ended up having a really generative conversation where I think both of us learned a fair amount. And it was clear that he wasn't coming from a hateful place. Like, if you sort of ask what the people chanting these slogans mean, the vast majority of the time, they're not going to say, oh, I mean, death to Jews, obviously. They're going to say something like they want sort of dignity and human rights for Palestinians. And that's where people are coming from on this issue, regardless of the sort of incendiary things that come out of their mouth. So it's just good to keep that in mind. And um, yeah, college is great. It's fun.
Okay, college is great. It's fun. That's basically where we should end. That's like a great takeaway. Um, any last thoughts, Maiya or Deborah? Like just hearing this, I just want to go back to you one last time here.
I mean, college is great and fun. Absolutely. I mean, I think, the real thing is college is what you make it, right? So your experience is going to be what you bring into it. So I do think that that is a super important sentiment. And, yes, we want to be careful. Yes, we want to think things through. We want to do our research. But there are places where you're going to be happy. These places exist, and it's not one place. There's many places that you can find a good fit and thoroughly enjoy your 4 years. Even if you're having challenging conversations, which I loved that Cal said, like those are some of the best ones, right? Sometimes when you're uncomfortable, that's when you learn, that's when you grow, right? So college is so important for so many different reasons. And this has been great. Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Maiya, any last words?
You said it great. Exactly. Take advantage of what's around you, do your research, enjoy it. And yeah, that's it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining in this conversation. I feel, first, I just feel better for for everybody watching who's like, in a little bit of a place of freak out. I think that hearing actual stories and hearing like great perspectives on all of it is really helpful and really grounding, and really helps us just keep in mind like sometimes the hysteria of the media is not a good place to start with all of this, and grounding it in more personal experience and like asking the right questions about Jewish life. And we are deeply committed to this ongoing conversation. As an organization that works with teenagers and with parents of teenagers, we know that this is an important conversation, and we hope to revisit it in future years because it really does make a difference. And I do feel like the more you can think about the Jewish community that you want to be part of before you leave home, the better. And first of all, just thank you, Cal and Laine, for helping so many people understand the perspectives on campus. Thank you, Deborah and Maiya, for giving us a bigger picture. And thank you all for joining us. And we will have a recording of this webinar if you want to send it to any friends. Please support the work of Moving Traditions. We have a wonderful team of folks who are supporting teens and parents and communities all over North America. And we really, really value everyone's contributions, particularly at this time as we're ending the year. So there's going to be a link, and you can support us through that link. And now we're just going to take you into a slideshow and say goodnight. Thank you all so much.